good evening. And with the gentle hum of a bedside fan, let's take a look at what marriage was really like for women under Queen Victoria. In Victorian marriage, love could be a liability, and paperwork held the power, written into deeds and registers and carried by courts and church books. If you enjoy history told this calmly, tap like and subscribe. So this kind of soft, fact-forward storytelling keeps finding you. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is, whether it's late night or an early morning. Unclench your jaw and lower your shoulders and let one slow breath leave the day. Victorian marriage was a locked suitcase with hidden compartments, and for women, it worked like a contract that moved power, set the work of the day, and closed off exits, tested by custom and law. So from your room, step toward a doorway to the past. A door latch lifts, and a maid admits a caller to the narrow hall. In the parlor, the warm coal glow in a small fireplace grate softens the edges of brass and glass. A name is said aloud before footsteps cross the rug. The card that carried it sits ready on a tray, edges crisp, ink neat. Afternoon calls happen within fixed hours, often after lunch and before dusk. Visits are short, often 15 minutes. Introductions are careful, and a young woman is seldom left with a man without a chaperone nearby. A clock taps steadily on the mantel, steady as a metronome. The air holds a faint scent of polish, and the faint whisper of the maid's skirt marks her path. Each step in this room has rules. Chaperoned visits keep talk public. Calling hours keep timing predictable. The family decides who may enter and when. Class lines set the front door's hinge. In the homes of the gentry and the solid middle class, a caller presents a card, then waits to be received. A butler or maid may deliver the polite fiction of "not at home" if a match looks unwise. Social directories and church pews shape who meets whom. Working families follow a different pattern, often meeting in kitchens, yards, chapels, and on half-days off, where parents and neighbors still watch. It is not quite speed dating. The parlor itself enforces rank. A new acquaintance may stand until invited to sit. A closer friend sits on the edge of a chair, gloved hands neat, while tea clinks softly. A suitor speaks to the mother, then to the daughter. A young woman answers plainly, avoids private jokes, and keeps her gaze steady. Even small choices, like whether a piano is opened or shut, signal welcome or caution. These courtesies do practical work. They screen for money, faith, kin ties, and reputation. They allow families to sound out settlements and expectations long before vows bind them. A household is a clock that runs on people. The rhythm here will set the later pace of labor and law, since a husband may gain strong control of a wife's property and wages until reforms nibble at that power in the 1870s and 1880s. The right to leave a marriage is narrow and costly, and the road to it often starts in rooms like this, with a name on a tray. A rustle of folded letters on the side table hints at the next step. Notes request walks, garden visits, and church pews, all watched, all timed. A mother or aunt sits nearby with quiet patience, and a father keeps to his study until needed. The maid crosses in and out with tea and biscuits, a polite shield against too much privacy. What looks like small talk begins to shape lives. Suitors learn schedules and beliefs. Families check income and trade. The room's warmth hides the calculation, but it does not erase it, and few want it to. Proper order is seen as safety for daughters, and steady reputation for sons. The door latch falls back into place after the short visit. The card rests on the tray, and the clock keeps time. Follow that visiting card to the parlor table and to the rules that govern it. A maid steps into the front parlor and presents a calling card. She carries the tray and sets it down with the soft clink of a card on a silver-edged tray. Faint tea steam lifts near a cup, and beeswax warms on polished wood. The name sits in neat script. The small rectangle is permission to enter, or not. A hostess scans the name, checks her at-home day, and decides if the visitor may be received. Calling hours keep the pace in order. Respectable calls cluster in the late afternoon, and they run short, often 15 minutes. Many ladies print an at-home day on their cards, so callers do not blunder in at random. Street hoofbeats fade beyond the window, and the house keeps its careful rhythm. If she is not at home, a card is left, and the visit is noted. Introductions come through family, clergy, or trusted friends. A man does not simply ask to meet a daughter. He is presented, seated, and steered into supervised talk. First names wait for later, and a waltz needs a guardian's nod. Walks in parks happen with a chaperone, and seats at concerts come with watchful adults. Because reputation drove marriage chances, therefore every meeting stayed managed. It was like dating with red receipts and strict parental controls. Small signals carry weight. A calling card can be bent at one corner to show the visitor came in person, and a black border signals mourning. Some cards carry tiny notes in the corner, even PPC, to say a family is leaving town. A lady may return a card or send none, and that choice decides who calls again. A man may leave 2 or 3 cards, one for the mistress, one for the master, sometimes one for a grown daughter, to show respect to each. A door servant can say not at home to turn someone away, even when the family is upstairs. Servants and these bits of paper decide access, and they can open a door or quietly shut it. Gossip adds stakes. Neighbors note who arrives, how often, and who escorts whom. An unchaperoned walk or a long visit after dark can start talk. A hint of forwardness is held against a girl, while a man often walks away untouched. Mothers prefer a chaperone in the room, and a brother can serve in a pinch on a walk. Mistakes travel in pews, in shops, and in letters passed along. Privacy was a group project. These manners come out of law. Property settlements, dowries, and coverture shape what a match means for a family. Consent rules and guardianship set who may approve an engagement and how contracts stand. Even the banns or a license tie the romance to paperwork. The paper trail waits behind the tea, neat and firm. From the parlor's rules, we move to the ledger where law takes over. A registrar lifts a heavy ledger and opens it on the desk. A marriage license lies ready, neat and official. You smell fresh ink and hear the scratch of a steel nib. Ink glistens briefly on thick paper. In a parish vestry or a civil registry, the book and the rules look the same. The law called it coverture, a wife's legal identity folded into her husband's in the eyes of courts. Because coverture merged a wife's legal identity into her husband's, therefore, her property and earnings defaulted to him. She lost separate legal standing at marriage under common law. She could not sign contracts in her own name or sue and be sued in most cases. Her public name often shifted to his, driven by habit more than statute. A will without his consent rarely stood. A cool wooden bench under your palm steadies you as the clerk writes her new name. A dowry, a small legacy, or a weekly wage moved from her hands to his ledger. Even clothes and household goods were at risk if creditors called. If she brought land into the marriage, he managed the rents and profits. If a child was born alive, a husband might later claim a life interest, a rule called courtesy. Equity courts sometimes protected a wife's separate estate through a trust, but ordinary couples had no lawyer and no trust. Think of it like merging accounts and losing your password. The terms and conditions were long, and no one could scroll. She appeared in records as wife of a man, not as a separate actor. Some women and families tried workarounds. Marriage settlements set aside property before the vows, and trustees guarded it in equity. The price was expertise and paperwork that many could not afford. Reforms later in the century changed the law. The Married Women's Property Act, 1870, let wives keep their earnings and certain inheritances. The Act of 1882 went further, making a married woman a separate legal person who could own, buy, and sue. The 1893 Act clarified stray points, and the Guardianship of Infants Act 1886 added custody rights for mothers. Not every street heard the news at once. Yet shopkeepers, factory clerks, and husbands saw the change at the counter and at the table. Rights on paper shaped real leverage at home. Savings accounts, insurance policies, and wages could now sit in her name, which changed household bargaining. A ceremony would dress all this in lace and music. Rings, vows, and smiles would signal unity, while documents defined the terms. Close the book and walk into the aisle, where display does its quiet work. A church doorway holds its breath while a dress hem lifts above cold stone. A white gown brushes the air, and an orange blossom bouquet gives off a faint sweetness. Candle wax warms the drafty aisle. The doorway is a frame, and the neighborhood looks in. 3 Sundays of banns could make the match public, the names read out so any obstacle might be raised. A special license skipped that wait for a fee, useful for distance or speed, and the vicar knew the rules by heart. A citrus sweet note drifts near the aisle as the register comes out. Ink scratches, witnesses sign, and legal status clicks into place with 2 surnames and a seal. A modest breakfast follows in many homes. Tea steams, a bit of ham sits beside bread, and a sponge cake waits in the center like a small flag. Even the cake carried social weight. The trousseau sits behind the scenes, but speaks loudly, with folded linens, sturdy shifts, and a couple of serviceable dresses prepared by the bride and her women. Because weddings signaled alliances and respectability, therefore families staged display even on tight budgets. At times, it felt more brand launch than private promise. The result was debt pressure and social comparison, measured in how thick the table looked and how many monogrammed towels appeared for the aunt to admire. The white ideal traveled far after Queen Victoria's own gown, but the purse often said no. Many brides borrowed dresses despite the white dress ideal. Some rented a pale gown from a seamstress or wore their best colored dress and pinned on a borrowed veil. White stained fast and could not be a working dress, so a blue or brown silk made more sense and could be worn again. Orange blossoms might be real, or just wax flowers wired into a tidy circlet. The candles gutter lower as the last congratulations fade and the pictures fall back to errands and ledgers. The doors swing shut and the showpiece morning ends. Step off the church steps and head home to the work of a new household. A coal range sits in the hearth. A hand nudges the damper, and the heat lifts, steady and sure. You feel coal dust warmth and a hint of soap in the air. Warm grit dusts your fingertips near the stove. The range is the house's warm heart. A small housekeeping book rests by the bread bin. The mistress writes menus, tracks coal by the hundredweight, and notes the butcher's bill. She sets the budget and decides if there's a joint on Sunday or soup stretched on Monday. In a larger house, a housekeeper keeps the keys and the pantry, while a housemaid handles ash, steps, and grates. Without servants, the mistress does both lists and labor. Meals fix the clock of the day. Because fuel, cleaning, and cooking were labor-intensive, therefore, days centered on planning and supervision. Water must be heated before the sun is high. Fires must be nursed through damp coal. Groceries arrive when the cart can make it through the mud. Think of it like running a small startup without spreadsheets. A housemaid rises before dawn to rake out yesterday's ash and lay new coal. She carries scuttles, fetches pails, and sets kindling so breakfast can happen on time. The housekeeper checks stores, locks, and deliveries, while the mistress inspects the table, the linen, and the waste. The aim is thrift without chill and cleanliness, without stopping the day. The result at week's end is often exhaustion. Black-leading the stove and bluing the linens mark the week. The stove's iron is smeared with black lead paste, then rubbed until it shines, so soot smears less and the thing looks respectable. White shirts and sheets get a dip in blue, a touch of indigo to hide the yellow, then a hard ring. Laundry steam clouds a small window. Heavy cloth dries by the range on a rack. The heat helps, and it also tempts sparks. Menus match purse and season. With no fridge, meat is bought for the day or conserved with salt. A stock pot lives at the back of the hob, catching bones and peelings into tomorrow's broth. The mistress sets portions so the joint makes 3 meals. She keeps a sharp eye on drips of fat and ounces of tea, and she writes the numbers in the housekeeping book. Waste is a small scandal, thrift a small badge. Open flames and hot irons carry risk. A crinoline brushes a fender, a curtain swings too near, or soot catches in a flue that has not been swept. Fenders and guards stand in front of the fire, and a bucket stays filled by the door. Children are told to sit back. Maids learn to shake a cloth, not flap it at the grate. Burnout was literal. Newspapers record chimney fires and scorched sleeves, and letters mention singed fingers in calm, tired lines. Fuel eats time as well as money. Coal is ordered by the ton, but hauled by the scuttle. Ash is sifted for unburned lumps and carried out again. Ovens are tested with a hand or a scrap of paper, not a dial, so cakes and loaves rise on judgment. A wet week makes bad drafts. A windy day pulls heat too fast. The clock in the hall marks the same minutes, but the kitchen runs on the range's moods. Work shifts as the light fades. Lamps need trimming and oil. The supper fire is banked so it will catch in the morning. Knives are wiped. Pans are scoured with sand or soda. Floors get a quick scrub where boots have tracked coal dust. The mistress looks over the book once more, counts pennies, and sets tomorrow's plan beside tonight's clean knives. Here, time is a ledger, and flame is a partner that charges a fee. The damper slides shut to a quiet notch. Coals fall into a red hush, and the black lead dulls tonight. Let the kitchen grow quiet. Take a slow breath and sit near the clock. Take 2 slow breaths. The room feels gently still, Careful courtship set the early tone. Visiting hours kept suitors to the right time and place, with family near and conversation neat. Think of visiting hours like office hours for romance. Sometimes a rustle of folded letters carried feelings between those hours. Heavy law pressed on the home, with a wife's legal space narrowed once vows were said. Steady household work filled her days, from meals to mending to managing small economies. Domestic fatigue followed, a quiet toll that showed up in sore backs, short sleep, and thin patience. A mantel clock on a shelf ticks, a calm tick, steady and small. A low fire crackles, firelight shifting in the grate. Let your shoulders drop. Unclench your jaw and let the muscles rest. Because your breathing slows, therefore the details can soften without being lost. The names and dates can sit in place, while the picture stays clear enough to guide us. You do not need to hold every thread tight. It is fine to let a few knots loosen. The courtship rules still stand in the mind, with doors opened at set hours and visits ended on time. The weight of the law remains visible, if quieter now, like a coat set on the back of a chair. The steady work hums in the background, clean and constant, and the sense of domestic fatigue explains why a calm evening felt earned. None of that has vanished here. It only grows softer at the edges as the fire evens out and the night finds its own pace. The next steps lie in private rooms. Behind the public smiles and tidy parlors, bodies met and hopes gathered. Birthdays were counted and worries took shape in whispers. What that meant for a woman and for her marriage often turned on health, on money, and on how much say she had inside the home. We will keep the light low as we move there, steady and kind to the hour. From this quiet chair, step with me down the hall toward a dim bedroom. The half-closed bedroom door rests on its latch. The floorboards give a soft creak, and the air smells of clean linen. A candle gives a faint warmth. Church vows and the law framed marital intimacy as duty. A husband expected access, and a wife was told to be accommodating. Courts did not treat forced intimacy within marriage as a crime. Most learned through whispers, as mothers and matrons offered hints and advice books used careful euphemisms. Printed guides existed, but frank words were policed. The Obscene Publications Act of 1857 chilled open discussion, and the 1877 trial of Charles Bradlaugh and Annie Besant over a birth control pamphlet warned others to stay quiet. Many doctors avoided contraceptive advice on moral grounds. Midwives shared practical tips in private. Births usually happened at home, with a midwife or a doctor if cost and custom allowed, and antiseptic care spread slowly, so infection remained a risk. Training varied, and some attendants rejected new practices. Methods were patchy. Couples used withdrawal or spells of abstinence, and some tried douching afterward. Rubber condoms existed after vulcanization, but they were thick, reusable, and often stigmatized, so use was inconsistent. Sponges or pessaries were sold quietly, with mixed quality and little guidance. Many methods required a cooperative partner, which not every marriage had. The stork, it turns out, did not check the family budget. Pregnancy came often, and births took a toll. Childbed fever, hemorrhage, and exhaustion shadowed many lying-in periods. Reliefs like chloroform gained respectability after royal example. Yet safety was uncertain, and antibiotics did not exist. Because reliable contraception and safety nets were limited, therefore family size and maternal risk stayed high. Frequent pregnancies meant long years of nursing, recovery, and strain. From down the hall, a baby breathes softly. Think of it like trying to steer family size while wearing mittens. Class and place shaped the edges of that control. A wealthy household might pay for a reputable doctor and a clean confinement room. A laborer's wife often relied on a local midwife, neighbor help, and charity care when a crisis came. Rural families faced miles to reach help. Outcomes varied with income and distance to care. Growing households then had to stretch coin and time. Wives kept ledgers, bargained at markets, and timed meals to children's needs. Many took in washing, sewing, mending, or a lodger's rent to add small income, while older daughters watched babies between chores. Some called a woman's small cash pin money, but it often fed everyone. The budget work sat beside the cradle and the wash tub, steady and unseen. Snuff the candle and follow the coins to the kitchen table ledger. A mangle handle turns in a narrow scullery. Coins clink in a jar by the sink. Starch scent rises, and damp cloth sits rough on your hands. Each sheet feeds through the rollers in steady bites like a small mill. These hours often decided what could be paid by Friday. A small allowance lies on the table at week's start. People called it pin money, and it was meant for food, coal, candles, and small needs. The grocer's tally waits in his book, and your name sits next to the sums. A coin taps twice on a wooden table. Shop credit stretches the gap between wages and meals. Credit was a face, not an app. If you paid regular, the butcher nodded and cut on trust. A wash tub, a spare bed, and quick hands turned into income. Some women took in laundry. Others let a lodger the back room. Many did piecework at home, stitching shirts or matchboxes late. Because household cash flow was uneven, therefore, wives hustled through informal labor and pawning. Think of it like cash flowing the home with side gigs and microloans. A damp apron sits cool against your waist. A pawn ticket folds into your pocket like a second receipt. Pawn. Monday, redeem Friday, was a familiar rhythm in many streets. Monday saw linen or a coat walk to the broker, and Friday's wages brought them back warm from the shelf. The ticket sat next to the grocer's tally in the mind, two running tabs that kept meals coming. Interest ate a slice, and missed wages turned small loans into deep debt pressure and economic dependence. That arrangement kept meals coming, but limited choices. The law set the terms of who owned what. Before mid-century, a wife's wages and goods belonged to her husband, with pin money a custom, not a right. The Married Women's Property Acts of 1870 and 1882 began to change that, letting some earnings and property be a wife's own. That shift mattered at the counter and in court. A broker or grocer saw a woman who could sometimes pay from her own purse, though not every town or family honored it. Neighbors, kin, and shopkeepers formed the web that caught a short week or let it rip. A kind word from a midwife, a nod from a foreman's wife, or a vicar's note could mean bread on tick or a lodger found. A cold glance could close those doors, since credit rested on trust and reputation, not rules. Wipe your hands dry and step into the front room set for callers. A polished side table holds a shallow card tray and a small vase. A card edges neatly under another on the tray, as footsteps hush over a hallway runner and a faint trace of perfume drifts in the corridor. Calling cards sat at the center of visiting culture. Middle and upper class households kept visiting hours, often in the afternoon from 3 to 5. A newcomer left a card by hand or through a servant. the lady of the house could return the call or decline it. One folded corner meant the caller had come in person. Mistresses used the tray like a filter, polite but firm. Churches set the week's rhythm. Pew rents and parish lines mapped who you met. A vicar could introduce a young wife to a mother's meeting or a sewing circle. Temperance and charity societies met in schoolrooms and back rooms, where women ran tea urns and sign-up sheets. Committees gathered subscriptions and tracked cases. In this world, everyone was a little bit HR. Charity committees kept ledgers and guarded the door to aid. Ladies' visiting societies sent pairs to check a home before giving coal tickets or a place on a clothing club. Relief often needed 2 references or a note from the vicar. Think of it like a neighborhood verification badge. Because social reputation governed access to help and chances, therefore, one misstep could isolate a woman. Mourning dress gave its own schedule. A widow in deep mourning wore black crepe and stayed out of visits for months. Second mourning eased the rules, and half mourning in gray, or lavender said calls, could resume. Cards with a black border told the same story from the card tray. In a quiet hall, the clock ticked while the rules counted weeks. Reputation decided outcomes. A steady wife with church ties might receive soup, rent help, or a place for a child in a parish school. A woman marked by gossip could meet social ostracism and a closed door. Temperance women tried to reform a drunk husband with visits and pledges. A curate or a district visitor might write a note to a charity or recommend a mother's shelter. A whisper could undo it. Hard cases showed the net had holes. If a marriage bent under debt, desertion, or blows, visiting cards could not hold it up. A wife might find herself off the visiting lists and on the edge of parish relief. Step outside now into cooler air by the court buildings. Draw a slow breath in, then let a longer one out. The mantel clock ticks in an easy beat, and the rustle of folded letters softens to a hush. Private life carried strain. Bodies worked through pregnancies, laundry tubs, and the nighttime pull of duty set by marriage law. Hearts and backs ached in private rooms, and sometimes a hard week eased at last with a small, felt relief after strain. The custom of Sunday rest broke the pace for a day, and it mattered. Household money stretched. Wives turned skill into coin with sewing, teaching music, or a corner of shop work. And some took in a lodger under a careful eye. Think of it like running a small side gig inside a marriage. A porcelain teacup on a saucer settles with a quiet click, a small puff of steam rising, and the ledger beside it waits for another tidy figure. Reputation set the limits. Eyes at church, in the street, and on the page of a letter made a kind of quiet fence that shaped every step. Because gossip could close doors, therefore, many women guarded their names in letters, pews, and shops. A neighbor's word could help a husband find steady work, or it could cost a wife her tiny market. Understanding can rest here and stay whole. The outlines hold even if the details go soft for the night. The room seems to widen as the curtains barely stir at the closed window, and the steady tick steadies you too. What you know can sit for a while without slipping. Exit routes waited in law and custom. Separation, desertion, and later divorce asked for money, proof, and time. And they drew stairs, yet they were there. Costs ran through purses and through standing in town, and even success could bring a smaller circle. When you feel ready, stand and walk toward the stone facade where cases are posted. Newspapers thump against a street stand outside a London court. Damp stone cools the air, and the tang of fresh ink sits on your tongue as rain beads on a courthouse step. The Matrimonial Causes Act of 1857 opened a civil path to divorce in England and Wales. Before that, a full divorce usually needed a private act of Parliament. After 1857, a new court for divorce and matrimonial causes heard petitions in public, with names read and details recorded. Court summons called people inside, and newspaper reports carried the stories beyond the doors, paper edges curling slightly on a posting board. Petitions did not treat husbands and wives the same. A husband could seek divorce for his wife's adultery. A wife usually had to prove adultery plus cruelty, desertion, or another serious wrong. Think of it like canceling a contract with fines and headlines. Lawyers, fees, and witnesses made the process costly. Reporters could sit in the room. Judges asked pointed questions. Privacy was not included in the fee. Because formal divorce was costly in public, therefore many sought quiet separations or endured. A deed of separation offered one quiet route. A couple could agree to live apart and set maintenance, but they stayed married. After 1857, judicial separation orders offered court-backed protection from cohabitation and cruelty, yet no remarriage. Some women turned to magistrates after 1878 for small maintenance orders when violence was proved. Restitution of conjugal rights actions tried to force a spouse home, but they often ended in separation instead. The result was often limited remedies, thin money, and a careful face in public. Custody and property rules shifted slowly. The Custody of Infants Acts. Across the century, let some mothers seek custody or access to young children, especially if the father had wronged them. The Married Women's Property. Acts of 1870 and 1882 let wives keep earnings and own property in their own names. Those changes gave some leverage and sometimes a safer landing, but they did not erase the risks. Social judgment clung to the edges of every choice. A divorced or separated woman might face whispering neighbors, a cool employer, or a landlord who looked the other way when repairs were needed. A failed petition could leave someone liable for costs. A successful one could still harm a reputation. Maintenance might be ordered, but not paid. Stigma, financial risk, and limited remedies sat side by side. Charities, chapels, and kin made quiet networks. A sister's spare bed, a small grant from a women's society, or a place in service could keep a roof over a head. Refuge homes took in those in danger. Choices existed at nearly every rung, but each step asked for money, proof, and courage. A court door closes with a dull click, and the smell of newsprint loosens in the wet air. The mantle clock of the city keeps its slow tick, while folded letters wait in pockets and drawers. Let the courthouse fade and return to the quieter room you started in. From church aisles and calling cards to court papers and kitchen tables, Victorian marriage was where ritual, law, daily work, and narrow choices shaped a woman's life. Many met it with quiet resilience. They leaned on kin and neighbors, learned the rules, and looked for small footpaths within them. Some bargained within families and kept a calm face in public. Some built small savings and kept notes, turning household chores into steady management. Custom and clergy set the stage, but daily life did the heavy lifting. Work in the home counted, even when no wage was paid. Reputation mattered, and people watched. Change was slow, and people moved with care. The shape of marriage varied by place and income. yet the frame held. A clock ticked, a letter folded, and the day went on in steady hands. Thank you for listening and keeping me company tonight. Your time is kind, and I hope the calm followed you here. May your night be easy, your breath slow, and your sleep warm. Let your thoughts loosen, like knots easing in warm water. If this calm kept you company, a like or a gentle subscribe helps this small corner stay lit for future nights. Good night. You did enough for today. Let the clocks tick softer and the papers lie flat. Let the room grow still, and let the story rest quietly until morning.